Welcome to Young Money with Tracy Bissett, the advice show for young millionaires in the making. It's time for some $1 Million Straight Talk with Tracy, President and Chief Financial Fitness Trainer at Bissett Financial Fitness. Each week, Tracy's going to tell you what you need to know now at the beginning of your earning curve. Basic and advanced financial concepts made clear, healthy money habits and the missteps to avoid, and all the stuff that you can do to set yourself up for a future of fantastic financial freedom. Ready to lace up and start this week's financial fitness training? Let's do it, Tracy.
Welcome to Young Money. You are listening to episode 113, Milli Moves, How to Pay for Post-Secondary School with Suzanne Tyson. So this episode is part of the Milli Moves series. Young Money Millionaire Moves, or Milli Moves for short, are tips, insights, and advice that help you, Young Money listeners, continue on your financial fitness journey by taking control of your money and increasing your earnings power. And so to that end, I'm delighted that Suzanne Tyson is rejoining us to talk about all things related to money and finances with respect to post-secondary school. She shares in this episode such great insights, tips, and resources that will help you before, during, and after your post-secondary experience. And so it's a really important episode. For me, it's extremely important to keep bringing episodes like this to you because how much debt you acquire, how you're handling that debt can impact your credit score. It's certainly going to impact your future. And for me, it's all about equipping you so that you can control your earnings power and your financial future. So all of it ties together. And again, I'm so delighted that she's back with us. So in this series, you will hear from experts who have a proven way of doing things and are sharing their advice with us, like Suzanne Tyson today, fellow young millionaires in the making, and me. So many of these episodes are in direct response to your questions and feedback. So if you love this series, I would so appreciate you taking the time to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're not sure how to do it, the details are in the show notes. I would also appreciate you sharing the series with a few friends or family members who would benefit. I know I love hearing podcast suggestions from those who know me. Have ideas for future shows? Send me a DM on any social platform or feel free to leave me a message on SpeakPipe. Again, the link is in the show notes. There are new shows every week, and I love bringing your suggestions to life. So let's get started. Listen to this episode and take action to put into practice one or more of these Milli moves from Suzanne Tyson today. Welcome to the Young Money Podcast. I'm really excited today. We have a very special guest joining us for the second time, Suzanne Tyson. Welcome back, Suzanne.
Hi, Tracy. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, it's fantastic. So Suzanne has been involved in various capacities with higher education and student funding for more than half of her 30-year career, holding roles in sales, marketing, and editorial at several publishing companies. From 2008 to 2012, she ran scholarship matching company studentawards.com. And in 2013, Suzanne combined all of her previous career experience to conceive, develop, and launch higheredpoints.com, the only company in the world to enable the conversion of loyalty points into funds for higher education. Her efforts with Higher Ed Points have directly assisted students and parents' funding of over $1 million in tuition payments and student loan repayments. Suzanne was selected as a 27 top 7 SheEO Canadian Funded Venture, and in 2019 was a top 5 finalist in the TELUS Pitch, Canada's largest small business contest, and was a regional finalist in MIT's Inclusive Innovation Challenge. So welcome back, Suzanne.
Thanks so much, Tracy.
So I'd love it if you can, now that I've shared your formal bio, share with us in your own words really how Higher Ed Points works and how it benefits students and parents.
Oh, sure. So Higher Ed Points is the only company that allows students to use anybody's loyalty points, their parents, their aunts and uncles, their boss's loyalty points, and even their own, if they have their own, to help them pay for tuition and to repay student loans. So the program can be used to repay the Canada Student Loan Program nationally. And the way that it works is simply, instead of redeeming loyalty points for a flight or merchandise in the loyalty program, the member would redeem for the Higher Ed Points reward, which is then brought back in $250 increments to higher ed points, and the funds are transferred, and we deposit the money directly into the student account at the school or into the loan account on behalf of the graduate who's repaying their loans.
Well, that is wonderful. And so I'm so glad you're back today because we're really going to focus our whole conversation around paying for post-secondary school. And I want to set the stage with our listeners. So could you share with us why it is such an important topic for us to be talking about and why you're so passionate about it?
Well, my personal belief and the motivation to start and to keep running higher ed points is that I believe that education is the great equalizer. It's the one thing that taps into the human potential that exists in everybody. And I actually believe that education is a human right. Wherever you go around the world, people are trying to find a way to access education. And in Canada, we're very fortunate to have such a great education system, but higher education is very expensive. And one of the main barriers to not just accessing higher education, but staying in school and graduating is funding. So higher ed points is, the mission really is to help people access education, but also to persist and to graduate. And then when they come out of school, Canadians are saddled with, on average, about $27,000 worth of debt. And if we can help students get out of that debt sooner, it's better for them. They'll have more flexibility with what they want to do, where they want to live, but also getting on with their lives, getting married and buying cars and buying houses. So that's what motivates me every day. And when I talk to people who use the program who say, my son was laid off and this program helped with his retraining, that keeps the fire burning in my belly.
Well, that's fantastic. And so on average, how much would you say tuition is a year?
So across Canada, tuition, when you average across all the programs, is about $7,000. But it's not tuition that's the great barrier for a lot of people. It's everything else. It's transportation, it's food, it's the rent, books, it's ancillary materials. Nurses, for example, have to do practicums, which means they need access to a car to drive to the hospital where they're going to do their practicum. And so while the tuition may be something that's easy to budget for, all of the other expenses come on top and can prevent people from entering the program that they want to study in. And we always say that nurses are the poorest of them all because their courses can be as short as 6-week turnaround. Their textbooks are the most expensive and they have the most ancillary materials. So the scrubs they have to have, the stethoscope, and transportation to their practicum as well.
Well, that's really, I think, provides a great overview of the situation, certainly why you're motivated. And I couldn't agree more. Certainly when people are able to gain access to training and to skills, they're able to control their earnings power, which in turn then can dictates how their financial future is going to go. So I think that it's fantastic that you're helping people get set up really at the earlier part of their life. And so what do you suggest the first step should be as you're thinking about your future?
Well, I think that ever since about 1995 or 2000, the world really changed in terms of funding education. And I think back when I did my undergraduate, it was okay to make a mistake with something that you were studying because it wasn't that expensive. There were lots of jobs out there. But I think the most important thing right now is for students and families to be sure that going right from high school into higher education is the right thing for them. And then being really sure that what they intend to study is something that they're really interested in. I'm not a believer in going to study something because you're going to get a great job at the end of it, because the reality is if you don't do well in the course that you choose, say you choose engineering or commerce because you can get in and because you think there's a great job, you're not going to do that well. Plus, you're not going to thrive in that environment. So the first thing people should do is explore their own interests and explore things in high school that they love learning about and studying, and consider studying that. In fact, we had a professor who was a music prof say that any parent who doesn't want their child to study music should just go to a music faculty, because the music students actually have a much harder program than lots of others because they have to practice their instrument, they have to perform, they have to learn all of the theory. And at the end of a music degree, even if the student isn't a teacher or a musician, they're great performers, they're very organized, and they make amazing employees. So that was a long-winded answer to find out what you're interested in, find the program that you want to study, because the dollars that you're spending on that program will be better spent than just going because you think that's the next logical step.
Yeah, I really like that explanation. And I love the way you tied it into music. Throughout kind of elementary school, junior high, and high school, I played the flute. And I can certainly attest to the skills I learned from number one, having to be really disciplined and practice every day. I had to be organized. I had to have my music with me. I had to do my theory. But then it was also really around leadership and teamwork because we would practice as a band. We would go to events. So lots of social skills were learned as well. So I think that's a great example for anybody who's trying to think a little bit more about what you can be gaining depending on what you're studying.
Absolutely. And that's really what employers are looking for more than, necessarily coming from a commerce program. They want to see leadership. They want to see that you've done something outside of just studying. They want to see things that require critical thinking and decision making, and interacting with peers. Those sort of, they call them soft skills, but they're not. They're really human skills and life skills are really, really important. So I would just say for parents, don't pressure your child to go into an area where you think the jobs are. Encourage them to do something they're going to love because they'll be more successful. And what will happen is while they're studying in the area they're liking, they're going to find other things that interest them. There are lots and lots of stories of students transferring from, in fact, we have Anthony on our website. He thought he wanted to be a doctor and then discovered he loved teaching and changed course and is now at Teachers College. So being open to those things is important. But the number one thing, I guess, is don't just go on to post-secondary because you think it's the right thing to do, because it is too expensive. And it's okay. Life is long. People are going to have lots of different careers. You don't have to decide at age 17, 18 what you want to do for the rest of your life. Take a gap year. There's an organization called Can Gap Year, or the Can Gap Association, that has all sorts of great, meaningful gap years that students can take.
Well, that's great advice. And certainly I'll find the link for that and put it in the show notes. Now, once people are in the mindset that they're going to go on to post-secondary, what should they do before, during, and after they're in post-secondary school? And so if you want to go through each one and maybe share a few tips or stories to help us understand.
Sure. So in the before stage, in terms of funding education, there are lots of sources of funding out there that might not be obvious the first time through. So I always recommend that students go to a website called schoolfinder.com and put in the area of study they think they're interested in. So if it's sports management, you can put sports management into scholarship or to schoolfinder.com. It will pull up all the different programs out there that's offered. And you can filter in there based on college, university, co-op, and that helps you narrow down the different options because you can study it at part-time, or doing a co-op helps you pay for school as well. So that's the first thing. And then once you narrow down what you want to study, it's figuring out where you want to study. And School Finder has links to each of the school's programs, and you can find out what admission criteria there is for that program and what the cost is. But then the next important thing is to look at the funding available, because lots of programs have entrance awards that are available for them. And that can be part of the plan. Hey, I want to move away from home. This is going to be less expensive than that. Co-op's going to help me fund things. So once you decide what you want to study, then start lining up your sources of funding. And we've created a resource that actually lists all of the different sources of funding in a ways to pay seminar I created. And so having the student go through what's the tuition, what's if they're going to live away from home, what's the residence or rent fee, what's the meal plan fee, what are standard costs for the textbooks for that course, knowing what it's going to cost you is the first step in planning. And then the next thing is to talk to, if you've got parents that are going to be able to support you, ask them, do you have RESPs? Are you paying for my tuition? Am I paying for my tuition? So you know what your expenses will be. That's the before going to school piece.
If I can jump right in there just for a second. Absolutely think it's critical to have those conversations. Sometimes when we start getting into things around money, we're shy, we're awkward, we don't know how to broach it. But if you're thinking your family's going to pay for it and they're thinking you're going to pay for it, that's going to be a big disconnect. So the earlier you're having those conversations, the better. And then you can brainstorm together how best to find the funding based on what are now the available options now that we understand where the facts are and where everybody sits.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many families will wait until the August before the students going off to school to have that conversation. So we actually, the seminar that I've created is going to start being incorporated into the grade 10 careers course.
Right.
So people can start looking at it as early as grade 10 because, your summer job can actually save up a year's worth of tuition for you, or, if you work through the year. So for sure, have those conversations. And maybe your family's willing to help you, but they're gonna lend you money, so it's going to be debt, right, as opposed to just paying for everything. Excuse me. And I think that being conscious of what things cost also helps with the students at school make decisions about, am I going to go out 4 nights a week to eat, or am I going to use my meal plan, et cetera. That kind of helps. It's a sobering look at how expensive life is once you have to start paying for it yourself.
For sure. And certainly one thing that doesn't help anybody is if you don't find out realistically what things cost, if you've got a number in your head that's not realistic, and then all of a sudden you're partway through your first year and there's not enough money, then there's finger pointing. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? There's upset. There's lots of stress when you should be focusing on your school. So you want to have a realistic budget so that you can plan accordingly versus saying, I think it's going to be X amount, and then having that shortfall during the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's very, very stressful. And so that leads me to what to do once you're on campus. So when students apply for their programs, a lot of schools will have automatic consideration awards. And so you'll be getting in first year, you might be getting entrance awards that are one time, or there might be renewable awards. It's a scholarship if you keep your marks to a certain level. So you can investigate those types of sources of funds before you accept the program. But in grade 12, that's really where the bulk of funding, free funding for school exists, because a lot of scholarships are for grade 12 students that are going on. And so the companion site to School Finder is scholarshipscanada.com. And if you go in there, a parent can do it for their student and the student themselves can do it. But you set up a profile on all the things you've done. So languages you speak, sports you play, marks, et cetera, what you're interested in studying. And at the end of the registration process, there's a matching engine that will give the student a list of all the scholarships that they could potentially apply for. And some of them are you'd never find them if you weren't on that website, because scholarship providers go to Scholarships Canada and say, please put our scholarship in the database. And there are awards that are, $500 or $1,000, but maybe have very few applicants applying for them. So that's the next thing before you get onto campus. And then once you're on campus, I always say physically go and find both the financial aid office and the career center, because anybody who's going to get into financial trouble, the first place that they can turn is the campus financial aid office. And I was joking with a student, they didn't even know where it was on campus physically. So that's the first thing. Go and say hi, because the financial aid officers love to meet students. Go with your parents if you're going on a campus tour. And what they also say is they can't help you on Friday at 3:00 if your roommate drops out and you're about to be evicted, but they can certainly help you if you see the warning signs coming down the pike and get in there. And they have emergency funds and they have other awards that maybe just were put in by an employer that you can apply for.
Totally want to reinforce that, because I will regularly ask my students, I'm a professor at Centennial College, has anybody been to career services? Has anybody been to the financial aid office? And I get a lot of glazed looks and not a lot of people putting up their hands. And it's so important. You're making a huge investment. So everybody listening, I want you to take this in. You're making a very significant investment in you and in your life. Use all of the resources that you're paying for and make sure you figure out how to get the most and use all of the value that's being offered, because there are so many people on campus who want to help you.
Absolutely. And I don't know if Centennial has this, but I was surprised recently. I was at an event where there were 3 schools in Ottawa, universities and colleges there. And most schools now have something called a One app, which means once a year, the students will fill out a scholarship application and they'll automatically be considered for awards that come up throughout the year. And the reason it's important to do it once a year is that your circumstances may change. They tap into marks. So if your marks meet a certain criteria, you might actually be notified, hey, you just won a $500 award just by filling out that application at the beginning of the year. And the other thing is, if a student does receive any OSAP, I always say, students should apply for OSAP even if they think everything's covered, because there are certain things on campus that having been approved for OSAP makes you eligible for. For example, campus work study programs. Generally, the work study program, those positions are the ones that are on campus, go first to students that are on government financial aid. So you don't have to take the loan if you don't want to, but being approved means that you're going to be first in line for those plum jobs. And also Waterloo has an example. They look at the OSAP that students have received, look at what their program costs are, and they have an equal access grant that essentially will top up your OSAP, your grant portion, if your program is more expensive than others. So that's being, aware of those programs and resources. You're leaving money on the table if you don't actually go into the financial aid department and find out about those things.
Well, I think those are all fantastic tips, and some are new to me. So I'm really glad that you shared those, Suzanne. So what's next? Anything further for while we're still there, or are we moving on to when we're graduating?
So the one thing that's been interesting, I've got a daughter in third year at Queen's, and the summer of grade 12, she ended up getting a job. She needed some flexible employment because she was doing an arts camp program that traveled. So she ended up getting a job at Starbucks. And when she wasn't traveling with the arts camp, she would work shifts at Starbucks. The amazing thing, Starbucks is an amazing employer. And the wonderful thing about her having a job in Toronto at Starbucks was when she went to Kingston, you can transfer. And so I would say to students, get a job consciously that you might be able to carry on with when you're on campus. Anything that's franchise-based, so a McDonald's or a Burger King. There's another student I met who worked at Burger King and has been able to work in different cities at those. There's Canadian Tire, Home Hardware, because you've already been given the stamp of approval by the corporation. And now my daughter's in third year and she's still working shifts. She'll pick up extra shifts if she has something she's saving for or needs some cash. Mm-hmm. She's going to go on exchange in Scotland, and she can even transfer to the Scottish Starbucks. So in terms of jobs and reducing the stress while you're at school, having a flexible employment arrangement is always useful. And having that organized before you go to campus is something that I've confirmed with a lot of students is very helpful. Or, doing administrative work. If you've got anybody that runs their own business, doing something that you can do part-time on the computer is helpful. The optimal number of hours to work a week while studying full-time is about 15. Studies have proven that 15 hours actually makes you more efficient with your studying and doesn't cut into your study time. More than 15 hours a week can often cut into class time or study time.
Yeah, I certainly can speak to that because I have quite a few students who work more than 20 hours a week, and not necessarily that it's cutting into their class time, but it's cutting into their time for sleeping and resting. And to be able to learn optimally, your brain needs to be rested. It needs to be able to have that break. It can't be over fatigued, or you're not able to do that critical thinking and take in all the information that you need to. So best to arrange as much financing and cash that you can before you start. But if you do need to work while you're in, be mindful, trying to balance it during the weeks that you're actually in school. Maybe on your reading week or around holiday times, you're ramping up your hours if your job is flexible.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, I have a niece who thought that she had to graduate debt-free, and she was working at a restaurant and she was closing the restaurant, and she was living proof of that fatigue because she got completely overwhelmed due to lack of sleep. And it's school education debt is not bad debt. It's actually good debt because it's giving you opportunities that you otherwise wouldn't have. But it's about being mindful of taking on that debt. A lot of people get their OSAP and it's like, oh, this is free money. But anyway, there's a good balance. But it's not bad debt if you have to take on education debt.
Absolutely. And so now we're done. We're going to graduate. We're super proud, but we've still got debt.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes 30,000 or more. So once you graduate, so again, get into the career center, because a lot of career centers have jobs that are for graduates. So if you're registered, you'll find out about job alerts for recent grads. I think it's up to 1 or 3 years, depending on the school that you go to. So that's a great place to register before you leave. You'll find out about opportunities. And those are generally really great opportunities because the campus career center has personal relationships with the employers, and they come to them because they know they want to hire somebody from that school. So it can get your resume to the top of the pile when an employer goes back to your school to find you. You've got a grace period on your student loans. The federal government has implemented no interest accruing on student loans. So my advice would be to start paying off your loan as soon as you can. Don't wait until your 6-month grace period for your student loans is up, because if you can chunk down the principal while you're not paying interest, overall you're going to pay a lot less interest. We did a calculation for somebody who used higher ed points to pay off $250 of their student loan before they graduated, and the average student takes 8 to 10 years to repay those loans. That $250 paid saved them $130 of interest over the life of that loan. So it's money in your pocket if you can start paying those loans back quickly.
Yeah, I can't agree more. You don't want this hanging over you for impacting your choices as you go on with the other things you want to do in your life. If this was for your undergrad, you may have plans to travel, you may have plans to go on and do a master's or something like that. And so you don't want this debt impacting where the rest of your life takes you. So get on it quickly. And sometimes you have to make choices at that time that maybe are not the most fun for you. Maybe they're not what you want to do. Like perhaps you're going to go and live at home for a little while to really focus all the money from your job onto debt repayment. But remember, lives are long. And so being able to get your debt paid down as quick as possible is really going to allow you then to have the freedom and the flexibility to make the choices and achieve the goals that you have for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. And not everybody has loyalty points. In fact, we know with higher ed points that the students themselves aren't the ones with the loyalty points, but everybody knows somebody who does have them. It's a lot easier to ask for somebody's loyalty points than to ask them for cash. But we had one ingenious family. Their son graduated with about $20,000 of student debt, and they ran a business. And what they did was they said, okay, we'll use our loyalty points to pay back your loan so you're not paying any interest, but you're going to pay us 50 cents on the dollar so that you have a debt obligation and you're actually repaying something. So they gave him a 50% discount by using their loyalty points, didn't pay any interest, and he still had the obligation to repay them. So you might be able to do that with employers. Small businesses, they put everything. If you work in the construction or contracting or electrical industry, a lot of small business owners put everything on their corporate cards. So maybe you can strike a deal with your employer to use their loyalty points and pay them back instead of the government.
Yeah, I love that. And I particularly love that family's ingenious way of still making there be this responsibility and accountability for repayment. Because until you actually have debt and you have to pay it back, you don't really understand how that actually impacts your life and what it means to have that responsibility. And I think it makes you become a lot more astute about your money. You're certainly going to make different choices because you really understand the value of how far that money goes. And it's going to just lead you to be even more successful in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I think that's great. So we've got before we go, while we're there, and when we come out, which is fantastic. Now, you've already shared quite a few success strategies around what young millionaires in the making can do when they're looking for funding sources and ones that are often overlooked. Are there any other things that you'd like to mention in addition to what you've already shared today?
Well, there's one brilliant piece of advice I got from a woman named Janet McDonald, who runs a company called My Campus GPS. She was an admissions advisor at Dow for many years, and she said so many students don't use the academic advisors. And what happens if you don't use your academic advisor is you may choose courses that aren't going to help you graduate. And she said it can save literally thousands of dollars by going in and seeing your academic advisor and ensuring that the courses that you're taking are leading to if you want to graduate in 4 years, leading to that graduation. Because if you have to do extra courses, you may risk not graduating at all, or you may take a year or two extra to complete it. So that was really great advice that I had never heard before. And a lot of guidance counselors I talked to in high schools also like, oh, that's a great point, because in high school, you've got your guidance counselor. At university, a lot of times you have to seek them out. So use those resources too.
Right. And I know certainly I'm always talking to my students about that because Again, another resource on campus. We call them success advisors, but not all students are making use of them. And you're really not equipping yourself with all of the facts if you're not seeking everybody's expertise to figure out the smartest, best way to do it. You don't need to figure it out on your own, but you certainly do need to take the initiative to find the people who can help you. Because as you said, if it ends up taking extra time, you're certainly going to be spending more money on potentially another semester of tuition. You're going to have extra living expenses and everything else that goes along with it by staying longer at school.
For sure.
Very good. Now, are there any missteps that you see young adults make when it comes to their post-secondary experience, financial or otherwise?
I think going into a program that isn't right for them and sticking with it when they know it's not right for them would be, it's an expensive mistake, but it's also a life mistake. So recognize, I'm really not enjoying this psychology program I've taken. I thought it was all about talking to people, but it's really a lot of science. Recognize it quickly, and then go and see your academic advisor and find out what other programs are out there. So don't just stick it out because you feel like you have to. There's lots of flexibility. Consider the trades as well. You don't have to go into post-secondary. There's a big push now. There's a company called Kick-Ass Careers that you can check out that talks all about the trades, and you get paid to study. So apprenticeships are paid. And I think feeling like the money that you're getting from your line of credit or from the government is free money that doesn't have to be paid back, that's probably the one common, I wish I had known comment that I get from students. I wish I'd been more responsible with the OSAP grant money that I got because, man, I really ran out of money in second term. And if I hadn't, gone out as much or bought that new computer or just stuck with my old computer, it would have made a big difference.
Those are all fantastic. And certainly I hear that as well, that last piece about didn't realize like how quickly the money was going to go. And on top of the student debt that you talk about, we also know from the research that students are coming out with anywhere between $2,500 and $3,000 in credit card debt because they're signing up when they see those companies on campus getting the credit card and not really understanding that obligation to repay that. And certainly there's a very strong requirement to make payments monthly. And if you're not doing that, it's already affecting your credit score before you come out of post-secondary. So to keep that in mind as well, I would say.
Yeah. And it's the other big advice, and maybe it's old fashioned, is go and take out $40 cash and use that cash instead of the virtual tap, 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 tap. It's so easy just to pull out your and if you don't see the funds themselves, it's so easy to pull out and tap and lose track of all the spending.
Absolutely. I even know myself, sometimes I don't even see the totals when I'm buying things. Like I presume that it's in such an amount, but really making yourself be mindful of how much exactly is this right now, as opposed to just here's my card.
Yeah, and there's a lot of e-transferring that goes on between my daughter and her friends. And you may have a student bank account, but if you get over a certain number of transactions, you're going to start paying for those. So you can be paying more in transaction fees than you realize every month in your banking.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Now, are there any final pieces of advice that you would like to leave the listeners with? It can be something new or something that you really just want to reinforce so you make sure everybody's taking it away today.
I think that if you can get your financial ducks lined up and understand you may have some debt coming out, but if you plan enough and you're mindful of how you're spending your money, then you can focus on studying. And the benefits of that are, there's lots of mental health benefits, but not thinking about money is really the best gift you can give yourself while you're studying. So you can focus on studying.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So I think that is wonderful advice. So before I let you go, what are you working on now and where can listeners go to learn more about you and Higher Ed Points?
So Higher Ed Points is higheredpoints.com, and we are in the process of bringing a new loyalty partner on board. So hopefully that will happen very soon, and people will have another opportunity to tap into friends and family's loyalty points. And also the Ways to Pay seminar that I offer. I'm happy to come and give presentations wherever possible to groups of students in higher ed or in high school. And we're eventually going to be turning that seminar into an online course that will be offered through the high school careers program as well.
Excellent. Well, I think that's fantastic. So, Suzanne, I really want to thank you for joining us again today. It's such an important topic. It really shapes your future, how well you handle this stage of your life. And it's important as the young millionaires in the making who are listening, it's important to know that you are accountable for this. You're responsible for this. Sure, you are young and when you're making these decisions, but a lot of your parents, they don't have the training as well. And so it's a collaborative thing, and you both need to work on it so that you can get the best success for you and your family. So I really appreciate everything you shared, Suzanne, around all of the great tips. I'm certainly going to put links to those websites that you mentioned in the show notes. So like the Can Gap Association, schoolfinder.com, Scholarships Canada, My Campus GPS, because those are all really great gems that I think maybe are not at everybody's fingertips. And I really loved what you just finished with in terms of your final piece of advice, in that the best gift you can give yourself while you're in school is not to have to worry about money. So I think that that's absolutely critical, and students will have the most success when they're able to focus on their job, which is being a student, and participating in extracurriculars, doing the best work that they can. So when they come out of school, then they can land strong and get the jobs that they want and shape the lives that they've been dreaming about and they want to have. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's wonderful to chat with you, and I appreciate all that you do to help young millionaires in the making get there.
Thank you. So there you have it, listeners. Suzanne Tyson, founder of higheredpoints.com. As I mentioned, in 2017, she was a top 7 SheEO Canadian Funded Venture, and in 2019, a top 5 finalist in the TELUS Pitch, a big, large small business competition, and regional finalist for the MIT Inclusive Innovation Challenge. So until next time, take good care and stay financially fit.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. To all you millionaires in the making out there, if you love this podcast, please subscribe on iTunes to keep your financial fitness training going. Oh, and leave us a review. And be sure to visit 2 S's, 2 T's, financialfitness.com to take your free financial fitness assessment. Find out how financially fit you really are. See you next week, young millionaires to be.